Aldo Mazza here. Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My guest on this episode is tenor player Donny McCaslin, who grew up in California and went on to study at Berklee College of Music. Then went on to tour with Gary Burton for several years. Then in New York with Steps Ahead with Mike Mainieri and many, many others that he recorded with over the years, his own recordings, and also his great work with David Bowie. This will be fun. This will be great. And remember to subscribe, as this really helps us continue the great work and fun work on this channel. Thank you. Hello, Donny. Thanks so much for being on the podcast and taking the time. This is great. I mean, it's been a while that I've been trying to navigate to get you on. I know how busy you are, but thank you again for being on.
It's my pleasure to be here, Aldo. Look forward to speaking.
And so before we talk about shaping our journey, from your journey, start from, like, where did this come from? Where was the first seed that was planted that then took you on this path? No matter how back, even when you were not even born, how far?
Sure.
What started it for you?
I think for me, I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, and my parents were divorced, and my father was a jazz musician. And I would see him once a week. He would pick me up on a Sunday morning and drive me down to the mall, the outdoor mall in Santa Cruz, this thoroughfare that runs right through the center of the city. And for many years, he played in front of this old courthouse on an outdoor stage. There was tables and food and drinks, and he'd play from like noon to 4, 5, 6 p.m., depending on the weather and the crowd. And so my childhood memories were filled with literally like having a little chair on the bandstand where I would just sit and watch them play set after set. And I guess it started when I was too young to walk around on my own on the mall. So I would just sit there and watch them play. And it was a really, it could be a very charismatic thing to watch. There was, singers, horn players, percussionists, and my dad. They played a combination of Great American Songbook, jazz standards, and I would say Cal Jader-esque Latin jazz. Because my father played, he had a Wurlitzer piano, but then also played vibraphone and marimba. So all of that made a big impression on me. They also play sort of R&B, like Feel Like Making Love, Mercy Mercy,
nice.
Things like that. So that was like the musical environment that I grew up in. And really, my father offered a few times, do you want to take piano lessons? Do you want to take clarinet lessons? And I always demurred. I was, I don't know what I was doing, playing some basketball or whatever. But at age 12, I made an impulsive choice to start playing saxophone. And straight away, my father got me a student horn, and he set me up with lessons with a guy who was playing saxophone in this band, whose name was Brad Hecht. And so I would go to Brad's house once a week, and it was part of the lesson was he would lend me 2 records each week to listen to, records like Lee Conant's Motion with Elvin Jones and Wilbur Ware, the Brecker Brothers, Heavy Metal Bebop. Others come to mind that I can't remember all of them at this moment, but it was great to, as you can imagine, hearing the music live on a weekly basis, then having some specific records to listen to. And then about the time, actually, when I started playing, serendipitously, the Kawumba Jazz Center opened in Santa Cruz. And so it was a nonprofit run by musicians, and part of their business model, Aldo, was at that time, bands would be in San Francisco playing often at the Keystone Corner, like a Tuesday through Sunday. So Santa Cruz, the Kawumba would do Monday night, and it's an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half drive down to Santa Cruz from San Francisco, so they could get these bands essentially on their off night to do a gig in Santa Cruz. They could make the budget work and all that. So all that to say, I started at 12, playing in my junior high school band, seeing my father's band, studying with my father's saxophonist. But then I also was able to hear Elvin Jones and the Jazz Machine
Oh, wow.
as a
Nice.
12-year-old. That was the first concert, like first, international, jazz great that I saw at 12. And then a couple weeks later, it was like McCoy Tyner,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
Gary Bartz and John Blake Sr. on violin. So I was in a great environment to be a young jazz musician, and I think it was just I, there's more things I had available to me. I mean, so that was 12, and then a couple of years later, you go to high school. So I'm 14 years old, and there was a high school not in my school district, but in the next one over, who had a really great reputation. They were the high school that was renowned for its jazz program. So long story short, I switched school districts, used my father's address, to get into the school district,
Right, right.
and I got into this big band. And the story was the director, Don Keller, was really good friends with Bill Berry from the Navy, both trumpet players. And Bill had been in Duke Ellington's band.
Okay.
And Bill lived in Los Angeles, had his own band called the LA Big Band, but had all these Ellington charts that he gave to Don. And this was at an era where this was not readily available for high school bands or college bands. I mean, I think, I know there was a few out there at that time, but we had like a whole book full of,
Wow.
Rockin' and Rhythm, Warm Valley, Diminuendo and Crescendo and Blue, Upper Manhattan Medical Group, like all these really interesting songs. I had no idea how fortunate I was to be able to play this on a daily basis. We rehearsed
Wow.
5 days a week. And at that time, in that school
Nice.
district, it was a regular period. It wasn't,
Wow.
they still had the budget. So it wasn't that I had to come to school early for a 7 a.m. rehearsal or stay after. No, this was like, third period or whatever. So,
Sure.
so really fortunate to have that, and so it just took hold for me really quickly. The journey for me, it started on the instrument at 12, and I guess I would say that I got locked in really quickly. And part of that was, the unfortunate side of the story was, I lived in a really dysfunctional household, very abusive stepfather. So I was, troubled, a lot of emotional turmoil, trying to process all this um, traumatic
Sure.
experience that I was
Sure.
having at home, and not really having the language to speak it. I didn't know. I knew what was happening was wrong. I didn't know. I was a child.
Sure.
So all that to say, music
Of
was a
course.
real outlet for me.
Huge.
And just the ability to uh, play and improvise, and it was just it could be emotionally cathartic for me.
Sure.
And as you know, and all of us know who are involved in this, of course, frustrating, and why am I not better? Why do I, all of that,
Sure.
but when it connects and we're in that moment of flow, can be called a lot of different things. I can remember that even as a young, very untrained musician, feeling that catharsis. And that's what really was a lifeline for me emotionally as a kid, and was, I think, a big reason why music just took over.
Sure.
Like just took over,
Sure.
and
Sure.
so I was in it. I
Yeah.
was in
Well,
it
it was.
all the way at a young age, at that age.
Yeah, no, no, and I'm glad you said that, because I mean, music, as we know, is a pillar, is a savior, and those of
Yeah.
us who were fortunate enough to come across it and stay on it. I mean, my father was just, he would always say, whatever he's doing, he's playing music. I know he's not out stealing hubcaps, and I don't have to get him out of jail. And so you
Yeah.
go through that period where not only it keeps you focused on the good of things, but really focused and develop the creativity and social consciousness, and all of those things, and how to figure things out, because it goes beyond. It's good. It's a really healthy mental environment, whatever your physical environment might be. But it gets you through. It's that ship that gets you through that Pacific, the wild Pacific. And I think what's sadly, when they say we don't have the budget for it, there should be, because that's sanity. That's creating a sane world, regardless. And it has no language. It has no other purpose. But you feel great, community, figuring things out. And we know what happens to the brain when we're playing music, being able to work as a group of people, connecting. All of that stuff. We do these corporate team building things, and it's amazing to watch. Just with drums, you have to be a team player. You have to play at the same time. You can't be faster or slower. It doesn't work. You can't be louder or so there's this whole thing going on. And learning the creative should actually start in kindergarten and stay on, like mathematics, like grammar. It should be the base. But, when I'm president...
I agree.
But it's interesting that, that you managed to stay on, like those of us who did it in whatever context. The music was like our savior, and thank God for music, because it is really what keeps everything going at all times. And of course, there's technology, there's all the developments. But being able to go around the world in the language of music, and you go somewhere, and it doesn't matter what planet, what culture, everybody understands 100%. Isn't that great?
It's great. And what that makes me think of, Aldo, is just when I really started to travel as a young musician, it was such an eye-opening experience. And an inspiring experience. I grew up without a lot of means, so there really wasn't any traveling at all when I was a kid, except for, camping and whatnot, but in the area. But there was no international travel. There was no interaction with, cultures that were quite different than the one that I grew up in. So it was when I became, when I became, I guess, a professional musician and started really going to Europe, going to South America, going to Central America, going to Canada, going to Asia. It was so eye-opening and inspiring. Some of my tenderest memories, I like being in Argentina at the bass player's family home, and they have, this asado going, and it's been going for hours, and we're just sitting around eating all this incredible food. And then, the father pulls out a guitar and starts playing, a folkloric tune, and the cousins start dancing, and, it's just, it was so beautiful, to see that, and the echoes of everything, the community, and just how music can really bring people together. And it is obviously, as you already said, it's a universal language, and to be able to connect with people through that, and being a portal in which to experience their culture, different cultures, has just been a gift in my life. I was just listening to the radio the other day, NPR here in New York, and there was a segment where they were talking about how much more isolated people are now. And there was a lot that went into this, but basically they were talking statistically, like, 1950, 1960, and so on to the present moment. And part of the dynamic was, without as many screens and technology, in the 50s or whatever, more people, pretty much everybody played a musical instrument. Many homes had a piano, and many more people were able to, just sit down and play tunes, and everybody knew their neighbors. It was breaking down that kind of narrative that we're all aware of, but looking at it statistically and talking about why it's been happening, it was really, kind of heartbreaking in a way, but it makes sense, but just that part of this age that we're living in is this breakdown in communication and interaction with other people. And I bet you feel this way. I know for me as a
Sure.
musician, I really love playing with people
Oh, yeah.
and the community and the conversation,
Oh, yeah.
and like, if you put me on a mountaintop for 6 months and say, write your modus, your grand thing. I mean, I would do my best, and I could do that, I guess, but really, I would much prefer to play with people.
Sure. No, you make me think of I just had this flash when I was on tour with my group in Central and South America. First time we went to Costa Rica, we were playing at the National Teatro Nacional, and we had a day off. So on the day off, we started, walking around, and we noticed that all these, we walk into a bar, and there wasn't a coat check, there was a guitar check. Okay, so we're all looking at this and saying,
Oh my gosh,
well, that's interesting because
that's amazing.
all these people would walk in and put their guitar there, and I'd take a number, and so they knew, because there wasn't 3 of them, there were like 20 of them, right? And then we'd have a coffee, we'd have something to eat, and then we go to a later one in the afternoon. Some of these guys would just go and get their guitar and start playing. And then all of a sudden, we'd have these jam sessions in these cafes or restaurants. And nobody spoke the language. I was studying Spanish at the time a little bit, but now I speak Spanish fluently. But back then, it was just a few words. I speak Italian, but that took me as far as it could. But it was amazing. The other guys in the band, in the groups, spoke only French. And we had these big jam sessions. And I said, that's what happens, right? It's amazing.
Yeah.
But
it makes me think of I've had some really memorable experience with Danilo Perez over the years. We met in college, and he's just a master musician. And one particular, your story elicits to me this time where I went down to Panama with him, and John Benitez was playing bass, and who was the drummer was Fidel Morales. From
yes.
Cuba, was living in Panama at the time.
Fidel
this is years ago. This is probably 20 years ago, 30 maybe.
Yeah.
Danilo's father was singing, but it was just, we would just do these long rehearsals and these folkloric Panamanian tunes and salsa. And I guess in that particular trip, I was the one sort of non-Spanish speaker, and it was just magical to be a part of it, and to from a layman's perspective, I knew some basics of clave basics, at that, but to see how all the instruments were working together. The conguero was his first name was Paoli. I can't remember his last name, but he was kind of a virtuoso, and just it was my first real okay, I'm a week with these folks, and we're playing a lot. And just trying to understand how the rhythms interlock and how they're playing with each other. And man, it was amazing.
Nice.
Life-changing.
And you met at Berklee, right? Because you went to Berklee.
Yeah,
right?
Danilo and I met at Berklee. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I read, and I did not know this, that you toured with Gary Burton for a few years.
Yeah, that was my first, earlier when I was talking about my first kind of real international tours, it was with Gary Burton. Yeah, yes. I joined his band sometime in my senior year of college, and was in that group for 3.5 years. Nice. First few years I stayed in Boston after finishing school, and he was touring a fair amount. So it was like having a master's degree kind of experience, obviously, with one of the masters. And Gary's a great teacher and had a lot to say, a lot of wisdom to impart, so it was a great experience.
Yeah. Gary, I knew Gary. I went to my first drum camp in Madison, Wisconsin, and he was teaching there. And I was a drum only, playing drums, and I wanted to learn jazz, and I wanted to learn everything. I was just one of those things, and he was there. So he was the first guy who taught me how to hold 4 mallets. hold 4 months.
Okay.
You know, but he was such a great teacher, a great communicator. He's such a brilliant musician. And I think he had just released the album Crystal Silence with Chick Corea, the duo album.
Yeah.
So I brought it with me. I said, he's got to sign this, because I wore it out. You know, I had to get a second copy. I had it worn out. And so I got to know Gary a little bit. And then he became president of Berklee, right? Genius man.
Yeah.
And I'm sure touring with someone like that for a few years, that's a master's.
Yeah, it was, you know, and there was a lot of talk about, you know, there's talk about music, of course, as you'd imagine. And he was very articulate about what, you know, he wanted me to do, you know, approach it this way, approach it that way, think about this. But there was a lot of also talk about politics and business, music business. You know, he's a, you know, really a genius-like person. So there was a lot of conversation of things outside of music, and that was interesting. You know, again, me coming from a small town and not having much experience with things outside of music. You know, I had gotten so focused on music, as I mentioned earlier, that was really kind of my thing. And sports, you know, just I love sports, but that was kind of my experience, and so it was really, you know, I really learned a lot around a variety of things, you know, playing in his group. It was great.
And I think, I mean, with someone like Gary and many others like him who are such brilliant musicians, also understand the nature of the business. I mean, you have to understand how things work. You cannot just be an artist sitting in your room and doing the art. You also have to understand how the whole thing works, because it is a big economy. I mean, and I had this discussion with some people, and I say, with politicians, and I would say, you know, when you folks who are not in the artistic community or in the creative art community, it is a business, and it is an economy. And, you know, certainly in Canada, and I did the statistics, I said, this is the 5th largest economic engine in this country. And I would like to see what it is in others. And it's huge. So there's the artistic part. There's the good that it does, and the investment with the economic benefits. I mean, Montreal, for example, after the years it had it was a manufacturing town. It was really blue collar, among other things, and it just was almost shut down, like Detroit. You know, there was a period where it was like dark, like that. And then there's this book. Then I read this book by a guy called Florida, investing in the creative economy and what it does. And then what they started to do in Montreal, here where I live, they changed it all around, and they invested heavily in the culture industries. Now, this city is like off the charts, for example. And I'm sure other cities that have done that in that model have benefited greatly. So what I'm saying is, it's those of us and those like Gary who understand that and impart it on others who will listen and understand that both are really important, because one engine feeds the other, and it makes the world a better place. Of course, you need economy. You have to, economics, things have to, they create jobs, but the creative one is nonstop. And the funny thing about it is, in that economy, and I said finally to this one group of politicians who asked me to speak about it, I said, you know, when you give a grant, when there's a big amount of money that goes to an organization or an individual, it is not sitting in a Swiss bank. It's producing. We just can't help it. That's just the nature of the beast. And when you do that, then it just keeps producing while we're playing music. Whether they're kids or professionals, it's important. And, you know, the creative, you know, also in politics. I mean, it should be used like the U.S. did that for a long time. You know, sending out State Department tours with Dizzy Gillespie, a lot. And it did a lot of good. And those countries that understand that, it really helps. Not just making people feel better, but it also makes people understand each other better. And there's an economy behind it. Doesn't get better than that. Anyway,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
thought I
I hear you.
I mean, it's interesting to see guys like Gary then become such. I mean, he's a brilliant player, right? And he's president of Berklee and running that ship while he's being creative and touring the world.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It means we can do it. Yeah, we are, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And he's got to, he had the skill set to do that and to, manage the administrative as well as the creative, it's just, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I've worked with some other people, it reminds me of Dave Douglas, for example, who, I was in his group for years and would observe, how he would compose, prodigiously, and then, plays the trumpet, of course, which is not a low maintenance instrument. He's got to be on the horn. And Dave was also running a record label, doing a podcast, also a long distance runner. I don't know if he's still doing it currently, but like all these things take a lot of time and a lot of bandwidth, and he was for some years a creative director at BAMP for their creative music series in the summer. And I always would marvel at his ability to handle all of that. And, administrative, creative, physical, it's a real special thing to be able to do that. I mean, I think about Wynton Marsalis, I mean, I don't know how much he's involved in the administrative side, but I mean, he just, to play, to be such a virtuoso on the instrument, such a, committed composer, writing these large ensemble things, such a student of the music, fundraising, doing all the stuff he does for Lincoln Center. I'm sure he must be doing a lot of admin. I mean, that's,
Sure.
Really impressive, really impressive.
I mean, just to understand it and be able to explain it and be part of it and be the promoter of it all the time, so that when something doesn't quite fit, the creative mind, who's also the administrative mind, say, well that kind of doesn't work because one defeats the other. So then you fix it that it can work. And he's doing it, right?
Yeah. Amazing.
Nice. You also worked with Steps Ahead with Mike Minieri, right?
Yeah, I did. And it sort of happened. I had been in New York for a couple of years, and I think maybe Eddie Gomez, who I'd done a couple of gigs with, recommended me to Mike. I think that's what happened. And so I got this opportunity, and I had been a big fan of the group because I was a big fan of Michael Brecker.
Wow.
Prior to that, I guess Michael had left the band, Michael Brecker, and then there had been some records with Bendik, this Norwegian saxophone player, and I think that had run its course. And then Alex Foster had done it for a little while, and then I stepped into the chair, and to me it was a really iconic chair to step into, because for me, Michael's playing on those songs, Pools and Oops, they're just totally iconic, incredible playing, and I just loved it so much. So it was a real opportunity, also for me to be confronted with how do you step into a situation like that, where it's some music that you really revere and you revere the role that you're stepping into. How do you do that and come with your own voice and not lean into emulating one of your heroes? And so it was a good opportunity at a young age for me to really have to think about that. How do I play on these tunes that in a way that feels like it serves the spirit and the history of the music that I clearly love and have been influenced by, but also is my personality.
Sure.
And not just me sounding like somebody who I'm heavily influenced by at that time.
Yeah.
And all I can say, that was all of that I was aware of at the time, Aldo, and I did my best with it. I just worked on the music to have it be as integrated as it could be into my being, so that I could feel as free as possible in the moment to be as expressive as I could. And then the chips fell where they fell. Right. I haven't really listened back to any of that stuff. So, but it was, again, just a great opportunity for me to think about, what is my musical language? What do I want it to be? How do I approach this?
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. It's a great challenge, especially on that level when you step in, following a Michael Brecker, for example. And when that that to me is like one of those things, like stepping into Steve Gadd's shoes, and all the stuff or any player, you immediately have to fulfill what the needs of the artist are, so that an audience recognizes. So it's not like gone suddenly left field, unless the artist wants that. But generally, you're filling somebody's position, and so you want to respect that. At the same time, you cannot lose yourself. Otherwise, your first purpose is to bring something to the table also. Because if you're just a clone, I mean, not that's easy, but if you're only a clone, that runs its course, and then you could be anybody. It could be anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you as an
Mm-hmm.
individual, I mean, you've done it. I mean, navigating through this and then developing what else could I bring now that I'm there and I'm doing what needs to be done. What can I do to bring to the table? What other dish can I make here that makes this special for my being here? Am I saying this right?
Yeah, yes, you are, and I agree, and that was really what was happening, and it wasn't. I'm sure it wasn't a perfect, as nothing in life is, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't always a clear path, but that was a path that I set out upon in earnest at that time. Before I was searching for it, and it felt a lot more clear when I was suddenly confronted with this opportunity.
Nice,
You know,
nice. And then I mean, you recorded with a lot of people. I saw a list of names. I mean, Hector Martignon in New York, piano player. We did a launch in New York at Rome once a few years ago, and we had him. We put a band together to do the launch, so we all played, and he was our
yeah,
piano player. Great, great
nice.
musician. And then I saw a name, Julie Lamontagne from Montreal, another great pianist who I know very well. I didn't know you played
Yeah,
on one of her
yeah.
records.
Julie's wonderful, and I trying to remember how I met her. Um, I'm not told. It's not coming to me quickly, but yeah, I really enjoyed. We did a record together and did some shows, and just, really fun to play with her. I just had this long history with Montreal. I started coming up really actually one really iconic memory for me was when I was in Gary Burton's band. It was the summer, and Gary's quintet was doing the Cross Canada festivals, and the final show was in Montreal, and it was at this Spectrum,
Okay. Wow.
and
That what a beautiful place.
it
Yeah.
was the year that Pat Metheny was the artist in residence.
Right.
So Gary and Pat had this tremendous musical history together, and then there'd been a long period where they hadn't played together, and this was, I believe, their first reunion in decades.
Right.
Um, and unfortunately for me, just before that tour started, I got chicken pox.
No.
So
No.
I was in Boston, and basically just in my apartment. The band went off, played quartet shows, and I was just, covered in chicken pox for a week, but I got well enough to make the Montreal gig,
Nice.
and it was just a really special night. I mean, I had never met or played with Pat Metheny, and then he was a hero of mine, and then suddenly he's there at soundcheck, and we're rehearsing these tunes, and it was just one of those really magical nights. Like, he was incredible, and I remember feeling really positive about how I played and how it felt musically, and it was, the place was totally full, and it had that energy, and so that was one of maybe my first trip to Montreal. And so, but it's been just decades of different experiences. Playing at L'air du Temps. David Binney, is a great friend of mine. Put together a group, and maybe the first time I came up, it was with his group playing there. Then we made a band together, and we play at L'air du Temps. We play at Isart, if you remember that
Yeah.
venue.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and years of that, coming back and playing. I met Charles Papasoff, and did L'air du Temps with Charles, and his project. He had a project around poetry with a large ensemble that had a lot of Jennifer Bell and Bill Maher, and I met them, and I've come up and played with Altsys their band, with Julie, um, um, and I know the Doxuses really well, Chet and Jim, and done stuff with them at,
Yes.
Upstairs, and been with my own group at Upstairs, and with, used to play with George. I guess I met George Mitchell, through Charles Papasoff and Martin August. So I would do sometimes Upstairs with Martin, and so
Nice.
I can
Yeah.
go on, but I've really been fortunate to have had access to Montreal for all these decades, not only as a coming up and playing the festival with, I played it with Maria Schneider, with my own band, some memorable gigs, of course, but also the community of musicians in Montreal,
Right.
Just great musicians, musicianship, imagination. There's a different aesthetic there that I'm always grateful for, because I
Right.
feel like it's really leaning into the creative, open, imaginative side of being a musician.
Right. It's a real hotbed. Do you remember the music camp?
The music hat. I
The,
know the
no,
name. I don't know if I
the
ever.
music camp the jazz camp that you and I, that's where we
Oh,
met.
the jazz camp. Yes, of course.
Yes, yes, yes.
Oh,
And
maybe I didn't. I must have misunderstood you. I sorry.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't
No,
hear
no.
you clearly.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean that was you, me, John Geggy, Frank Lozano, Jim Lewis,
Yes, yes, yes.
Remy Bolduc, who I forgot to mention earlier, and I'm forgetting other names.
Of course.
Judy Humnick, of course, one of the main organizers. I mean, that
Yes,
was
yes.
a really great, um, great environment. The
Yeah.
faculty was all wonderful musicians, all curious, um, giving teachers, uh, curious, interested musicians, and the environment was just was
Yeah.
wonderful.
I remember that one clearly because I proposed to you. We were doing a set each, and I said, well, I'd like to play. And I said, Donnie, what about if you and I do a duet? And I was trying to remember what we played. Oh, yeah. We did St. Thomas, and I played
Okay,
djembe on it. It was djembe and tenor sax.
nice.
I said, "Hey, this is this is where we could do something
Yeah,
really different," and it was fun.
yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But you went on to do like a number of recordings. I mean, you've been in Montreal, and I've seen you play here, and then working with Mark Juliana, who's become a good friend, who was actually when he was a teenager, he used to come to the Cossack camps in Vermont. So.
Oh, really? Neat.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was funny because, when his name started coming up as a headliner and he was doing really well, I mentioned to Yolande, my wife, I said, Mark Juliana. She says, oh yes, he came to the Cossack camps when he was like 17 in Vermont. So he was there 2 years in a row, and that's when he met John Riley. There's a whole networking thing that happens, which is typical
Yeah.
of these camps, right? And it was funny. And then she pulled out because we have all the records. She pulled out actually his registration,
That's great.
and then we
Yeah.
invited him as on faculty later. Yeah,
Beautiful. Yeah, Mark's just a tremendous musician and very curious, and very, he's got a lot of vision and a lot of imagination. And,
yeah,
he's, one way he's been known, of course, is like the sort of electronica, drum and bassy, language, and applying that in a really creative way. But I'm not surprised that he was at the Costa camp, and I know he's been to Cuba and is
yeah.
really,
Well, we invited him to Cuba,
really.
and
Oh,
he actually
beautiful.
came
Okay.
twice. Yeah. Well, the
Ah,
first
nice,
time.
nice.
Yeah, because we would invite one person each year just to be part of the mix in building that bridge to Cuba. We had Jojo
Mm-hmm.
Mayer, we had a number of people, and at one point I said to Mark, why don't you come? So he did. He had such a great time. Then he called me and he said, "Can I come next year and bring my band?" I said, "Well, So I spoke to Piloto, who's the artistic director of the festival. I said, Piloto, I mean, this would be great. Let's do it. She says, absolutely. So we organized, because there's, the technological logistics had to be done.
Oh, sure.
But the trio came and they played. So because we have one night of like the Sabian night, because Sabian was a sponsor of the festival there. So we had the whole band play. And they had a riot, of course.
Yeah, sure.
And Mark, he just, yeah. But with Mark, you also did a record with David Bowie, his last album. I mean, you recorded with Bowie aside from that, but you were really involved with his Blackstar album.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that, because I'm curious. I have to say this, that I bought the album, and because I said, wow, this is really interesting. David Bowie, being such a creative singer who had this career, gets a group of jazz musicians to do this. I have to hear it. And I heard it, and then when Mark told me how it was done, but I said, wow, this is dark. This is dark. And that's all I'm going to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I could, the sort of the short version of the story is that I've been playing with Maria Schneider for many years, and that she was contacted by somebody from David's team about doing a collaboration, and she was getting ready to make a record of hers, and which for Maria is a very intense, involved process, and was maybe debating whether or not to take this on. And we talked on the phone, and I said, hey, this is I encouraged her to do it. I thought it'd be really interesting, and so she started meeting with David and working on this piece. And at one point she called and said, hey, I told David that he should do something with you in your group. And I played him your record, Casting for Gravity. And I was like, wow, thank you. What a total
Nice.
honor, And a couple of weeks later we talked again. She said, yeah, I told David again, you should do something with you. And then they came to hear us play. It was my group, and it was with Mark and Tim Lefebvre and Jason Lindner, and we were getting ready to make a record called Fast Future, and doing a warm up gig at the 55 bar, and they came to the show. And then about a week later, we had the first workshop for their piece, and Mark was playing drums, and it was Jay Anderson on bass from Maria's band, Ryan Kerberly on trombone, myself, Maria, David, and Tony Visconti, David's producer. So that was where I really met him for the first time, and we spoke. And the next day he sent me an email asking, if I'd like to collaborate on a few tunes, and it went from there.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was just a really transformative experience. He just embodied so much of what I strive for as an artist. He was very, really present in the moment when we were working together, not distracted by, he wasn't like texting or scrolling, he was really in it. And he was just his humanity, it's very generous spirit, always curious, and also really had a really strong vision, of what he wanted to go for. And I guess what I mean by strong vision is it maybe wasn't entirely clear what he was going for, but he was going to go for it and ride the journey out. So he was unafraid of, from his perspective, with his musical language,
Sure.
looking at different sort of genres, whether it was jazz or Philadelphia soul or whatever, and that's part of obviously why he changed so much during his career. It was that curiosity and that courage to really go for it.
Sure.
And those are things that I've always striven for, and to see that embodied with somebody who I was working with on a daily basis
Sure.
was utterly inspiring.
No, that's amazing. I mean, what's from the outside, you say, okay, here's this pop star, famous pop star, all those years. Of course, he can make another record, and it'll be whatever comes out, it'll be great because the history, the machine, everything else, and the talent. But to do such a such a turn, such a leap of faith into something else. It was because when I heard about it, I said, "Wow, it's really interesting." I'm happy that that happens because that's when creativity comes to a level. And if you're working with musicians who are totally sensitive and totally get it and are up there, and somebody who has this vision, whatever that vision is, and just jumps off the cliff into it. Wow. That to me is like, it's a wow minute. You say somebody who will take that on and say, no, I want to do this with those kind of people, with that community, those people who are doing that. Because it's specific. I mean, it's jazz and it's open and it's improvisation, and it's not just here, let's find great lines, great composition. And it's a whole other world to explore. And it actually, what it does is brings two worlds together, because we obviously, when I say we, I mean you, the musicians, have to like make this work on a compositional point of view, that it works in his vision, whatever that becomes. So it's a meeting of minds, but in an uncommon ground, because it's not common ground, right?
Yeah, that's true. And to his credit, he was very clear that we should do whatever we wanted. And, he gave us an utter green light. Like,
nice.
Literally the first day, he said to me, go for whatever you're hearing. Don't worry about what this is going to be called. Just do what you're hearing. And I remember him saying to Mark, who was sitting on the other side of him at the time, he said, yeah, whatever if you're feeling any polyrhythmic across the bar line kind of thing, go for it. So you can't really ask for a more creative environment to be in.
Yes.
It was just amazing.
Yeah. And you know what that reminds me of, strangely enough? The Beatles. When we grow up as musicians, the question becomes, does somebody with this great success, or artistic or economic success, or career success, how often are people actually told what to do or not, right? I grew up, when I was in a rock bands, we never told each other what to do when we were doing something creative, which was so much fun when you touch that place. And sometimes you work with people and say, I need this, I need that. Perfect. And I did a lot of sessions too, of course, and the producer or the artist knew exactly what they wanted, and that's what you did, and you tried to go for that. But at the same time, the other side, where nobody tells you, and you have to come up with it, so you have total freedom. And that was my big curiosity with the Beatles because I was a big Beatles fan forever. And in fact, I'm going to do a little side thing. This morning, my sister sent me a thing about Ringo, he's promoting his latest album on a UK morning show, and they showed a little clip of them in the beginning. I think she was standing there, just a little clip. And I've been one of those people that I always love what he does, just like Elvin or Tony or anybody or Gad. But every single note that they played was like magic, beautiful, everything. And his fills, his parts. And I would say to Greg Bisonet, how did he come up with that part? Like, and it's always the big mystery. Now, did somebody tell him, or did he just come up with it? So when the film came out, and you see quite clearly that nobody is really, Paul is suggesting a few things every once in a while, but Ringo would always come up with the part, and he always did that. He's not a trained drummer. It's just pure genius from God, like just on these four people. And then they had a producer who managed to produce it and put it all together really well. And just the fact that nobody told people what to do, and that's where I'm saying that where it comes together. And then I listened to getting back to this clip that I saw this morning, which blew my mind. I'm sorry I'm going on and on.
It's all right,
so I'm looking at it, and there's this fill, which is just ta-ka-ta, ta-ka-ta, 2/16 And if you hear the records, it just sounds like tom-toms. It's 2/16 ta-ka-ta, ta-ka-ta. And I'm looking at him, but that's not what he's doing.
Mm.
He's playing, he's left-handed, and I called my wife. I said, "Look," and she thinks, "Oh, you're crazy," but I get it because she's also a musician. He put a flam on there, traqueta, traqueta, so it becomes a chord.
Mm.
You know, like that's what I'm saying. Nobody tells them, and that's how you come up with this genius stuff.
Yeah.
If your channels are open. So
Yeah.
hearing this, that David Bowie dealing with jazz musicians who are always open to that, and if you know on this level, not tell them what to do and allow them, wow,
Yeah,
beautiful.
it was great. And, I mean, part of it too is that the music we were playing with my band, of course, was like sort of this exploration of the intersection of drum and bass and improvisation, electronica. And so it was, not that wasn't obviously acoustic, straight ahead, you know, music. We were kind of in a different zone at that period. And I guess where I'm going with this is just, we're all coming out of the jazz world in from our own perspectives, but we also had all of us have really sort of broad interest musically, and so we're able to to navigate the language of the songs that he sent us in a way that really met, I think, really organically because of our backgrounds, and that was, I think, part of what made that so special was it felt like a really natural fit for us because of the music we were already involved in and where we were coming from. And that's something that was just really, really special, about it for me. Anyway, yeah,
Yeah, no,
yeah, it just
that's
felt like,
great.
it felt really seamless and organic and
Yeah,
a
yeah.
tremendous connection.
And the interesting thing is, I mean, as a musician, of course, you're always moving forward. And now we're talking about history. As you're moving forward, you're always looking for your continuous development. I mean, I'm just thinking in my mind, people listening to us speak about this. I mean, everybody has a variation of that on their own levels, whatever that might be. So what keeps one going? What goes on in your mind? Because you're still a young player. You've done all of these huge bio and CV, but there's still music going on. You're still creating. What are the things that you're looking for and making sure that you're taken care of to be still doing what you want to do?
Yeah, I think part of it is just that there's still that restlessness of wanting to do what you described, moving forward, not doing the same thing over and over. What can I do? Where is this going next? And I think for me, sometimes there's been clues when we do a recording project or when I'm touring, something will happen where I feel like, okay, this element just appeared, and this is something I want to explore more. And so I keep looking for those clues and those moments, and I try to stay open to it all the time, and just be ready to see where the spirit leads me. And I guess one analogy that I've thought of for this is that it's like you're on a journey with a map, but you don't always have a GPS. So it's not entirely clear where it's going, but it's also trusting that you're going to end up somewhere that's going to be interesting, and that you're outside of your comfort zone. That when you're outside of your comfort zone, and this is something that David talked about, that you're onto something when you're
Ah,
out of your comfort zone. And there's been that's happened for me, and it continues to happen, and I take that as a good sign. It
yeah,
means I'm not done yet as a creative, and that I want to just keep going, and I still have so much to learn. I've been in it. We've both been at this for a long time, and I just still feel like, I wish I had more time in the day to study. Um, all there is to study about music, and so it's still something that I think really, there's just such an emotional payoff for me when I'm involved or I'm listening to music that really, really touches my creative imagination. It's just one of the greatest feelings in the world, and just to fall in love with a song or an album or whatever it is. And for me, I cherish those moments. They don't happen all the time.
That's
I
right.
go through
Yeah.
periods where I'm not, you know, I'm not, don't have something that I'm listening to that's really feeding my soul and really feeding my creative force. And when those moments come and I find it, I cherish it,
Right.
and it makes me feel more excited to be alive and more excited to participate in this thing, which is so great and rewarding, but also really a grind at times and really
Sure.
challenging at times.
Sure.
And so, but it's those moments, and I know you know this, it's those moments that make it worth it.
Sure. Oh yeah.
It's waiting for that payoff, that emotional payoff. And then when it happens, that feels like it's something that you can, put in the bank, and that will help you push through the hard times. I just, I, a story just came up. I was playing, the celebration of David Bowie's music. It happens yearly in New York, and it's the two musical directors are guys that one was Henry Hay, who was the musical director of Lazarus, the play, and Mark Pilati, who produced the record Earthling and was David's musical director for years. So they put together this thing that's playing through a bunch of the hits. And Sophie Ann Caruso, who was one of the actresses in Lazarus, she was 14 when she started on that play, and she said, before opening night, David had given her this pin, that she was wearing it at the performance, and she's talking about being a teenager and how there obviously are rough moments
Sure.
as you're navigating being a young woman, and then she would wear the pin and she would rub it and say, okay, whatever's in front of me, I know that David believed in me, and that it was really a
Sure.
powerful thing for her.
Sure. Sure.
And that reminds me of what this is. It's like if I have, the new McCoy Tyner Joe Henderson record from Slugs, with Jack DeJohnette and Henry Grimes, like that's something that's so utterly inspiring to me that I can hold on to that in the times when times are difficult.
Sure.
Um, anyway,
No,
so
yeah.
yeah, it's just a journey, and I think for me, it's still connected to my childhood, and it's still connected to wanting to express myself and to tell my story, and it still provides emotional catharsis for me. Even though I'm an adult now, I know how to talk about what happened to me. I work on it, but music still gives me that release, that emotional release, that is critical to my well-being.
Sure. Yeah. And it's interesting that you become more attuned to things like something appears to you or somebody says something and it's kind of a trigger. You say, that's exactly the word I was looking for that takes you somewhere else. Or,
Yes.
Somebody says something, hey, let's come to this show. I really want you to come to this thing. Or let's go grab a coffee. Or something, a situation where you probably wouldn't do, but it came up, and so you do it. And then it changes everything because you say, if I don't do it, I mean, you can decide not to do it, or you can decide to do it. And the fact that you're there, and somebody says, hey, wait a second, I've been thinking of calling you. Those kinds of circumstances that you need to show up, you need to be open to the possibility of something coming up that you didn't think of, but you're attuned, and you say, that's exactly what I was looking for. That happens
Mm,
to you, right?
mm, mm.
And you listen, I mean, in your journey, I mean, the decisions you make, I mean, you could have stayed in California. You could have done something else too, but you didn't. This is
Yeah,
where you're going, right?
thank you. I mean, I just feel grateful to that music happened, and that it has provided so many opportunities to grow. And like we were talking about earlier, just interacting with these different cultures, and being able to experience folkloric music from different places, to explore, rich history of this country. Um, yeah, I'm grateful, and I'm still curious.
Oh yeah,
I'm still curious, and I still want to keep going and find more there's more out there for me.
And it's interesting when the more you know, the more you realize how little we know, right? or or all of a sudden you see the ocean.
That's so true.
No, not yeah. I shouldn't say it that way. You're looking at the pond, but all of a sudden, as you grow up, you're really seeing the Pacific Ocean, and you say, "Oh, if I only had more time."
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
I mean, I certainly feel like that, and I'm sure guys like you who've done so much even more. I mean, whatever we've done, we're so, there's always gratitude. We're thankful for it, but of course we did the work. We showed up, and that you have to do, and you have to be committed, and all of the above. But then you look up, and you look back, and you say, "Yeah, I did all that." And it's like sometimes when I come up with an idea, people look at me and they say, "You don't think you've done enough?" Like, not in a negative, but it's saying,
Sure.
"Oh, like take it easy. You should enjoy something." Yes, but like you just can't sit on your hands just because you see it. Obviously they don't see what you're seeing, and they can't be in your mind, but you're looking over, and yeah, that's nice, but now I can do this because now you see it. Before you didn't see it, you weren't there yet, right? Now you're here and you see it.
Yes.
And you say, okay, let's sign a new contract. I need another 3,000 years. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I say to myself, man, I am so happy. I mean, we could do so many other things because we have the capacity, but having music dropped on us or like it just hit us in whatever form, and then you pursue it and you do it and you influence others in a positive way, and you become part of making the world a better place just by being there. Not just watching, but actively being there.
Yes.
And it just makes everything interesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we could go on for weeks about all these thoughts, and I'm sure you spend your nights not sleeping when you're not sleeping thinking about all this. I mean, it's natural, but I want to thank you for being on the show. This was great. I was really looking forward to catching up with you on this and having you say part of your journey. I know it's not the full story, but at least we have an idea to say it and share it. Thank you.
It's been such a pleasure to reconnect with you and have this conversation. And I just wish you all the best. And so happy that you're doing great. And I'm just happy to participate in this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And as I always say, to be continued.